Have you ever lost everything you prayed for only to find what you truly needed waiting at the end of the world? That was how ClariS Vaughn's story began, standing beside a stagecoach in the middle of nowhere, her heart heavier than the suitcase in her trembling hands. 10 years she had begged heaven for a child. 10 years of doctor visits, whispered pity, and her husband's growing disgust. Now she was no wife, no mother, no home, just another name carried on the cold Colorado wind. The stagecoach creaked to a stop on the edge of a frozen meadow. The driver, a gay-haired man with more miles on his boots than mercy in his eyes, pointed toward a lone cabin tucked between pine trees and snow. "End of the line, ma'am," he said, climbing down with a grunt. "Judge Crenshaw's orders. Man up there is called Griffith Cade. You'll be working for him work." The words stung worse than the wind. For years, her only work had been the quiet, lonely kind, keeping a home that never filled with laughter, enduring each month's bitter reminder that her prayers were unanswered. The driver dropped her satchel at her feet and tipped his hat. "You're his problem now." Then he was gone. The coach wheels throwing dust and snow into the air until both disappeared down the winding trail. Silence fell hard. No church bells, no neighbors, no gossip. Just the whisper of wind through the pines. Clary swallowed the lump in her throat and started walking. Every step toward that cabin felt like walking deeper into exile. When she finally reached the door, it opened before she could knock. Griffith Cade filled the doorway like a mountain come to life. Broad-shouldered, weathered, dark hair strewn with gray. His eyes, steady brown and watchful, were the kind of person didn't forget. He tipped his hat in quiet respect. "Miss Vaughn," he said in a low voice, "you'll want a roof before nightfall. Supper's on. No judgment, no curiosity, just kindness, plain and simple." It was more mercy than she'd seen in years. She stepped inside, feeling warmth, and the scent of wood smoke wrapped around her like a blanket. The cabin was rough but tidy. A stone fireplace glowed at one end. A wooden table stood in the center, and shelves lined with tools and books covered the walls. There was order here, peace carved from solitude. "I don't want to be any trouble," she murmured. "Trouble's what a man makes of things," Griffith replied. He hung his hat, nodded toward a small door. "Room's yours, bed's made. We'll talk about work tomorrow." It took everything in her not to cry. After days of humiliation and cold stares in Cedar Falls, being treated like a human felt foreign, she thanked him softly and went to her room. Later, they ate stew by the fire. The first bite nearly choked her. It was so peppered it burned her throat. Griffith's face turned red with embarrassment. "Lord Almighty, I'm sorry. Guess I got heavy-handed." ClariS coughed, then surprised herself with a small laugh. "It's got character," she said. A hint of a smile tugged at his lips. "That's one way to put it." For the first time in weeks, she laughed again. It sounded strange and wonderful in her own ears. When she finally lay down that night, she couldn't sleep. The quiet pressed close, but it wasn't empty. It was safe. Through the wall, she heard Griffith moving about, banking the fire, settling in. Somehow, that steady sound comforted her. In the morning, the light came soft and golden. She woke to the rhythmic thud of an axe outside. Through the frosted window, she saw Griffith splitting wood, muscles working under his shirt, the motion precise and sure. It was a picture of strength and peace she hadn't known a man could carry. She dressed quickly, braided her hair, and stepped into the chill morning air. "Morning," he said without pausing. "Coffee's on the stove." The coffee was black as tar and strong enough to wake the dead, but it warmed her bones. She stood on the porch watching him work, feeling something stir deep inside her chest, a calm she didn't recognize. "What can I do to help?" she asked. He set the axe aside. "Feed the chickens. Feed's in the barn. They get cranky if you're late." And so she did. The hens clucked and scolded her like disapproving old ladies, but she found herself smiling as she tossed grain. The rhythm of it, the sound of life continuing, settled something restless in her heart. Back inside, she cleaned the kitchen, scrubbed the stove, and organized shelves until everything shone. When Griffith returned for lunch, he stopped dead at the sight. "Lord," he said quietly, "ain't seen it this clean since." He stopped himself, something shadowed flickering behind his eyes. "I made biscuits," she offered quickly, trying to change the subject. They ate in companionable silence. When he reached for a fifth biscuit, he caught her watching and gave a sheepish grin. Been a while since I had real cooking, she smiled. How long have you been alone up here? 8 years, he said, not looking up. That's a long time. Long enough to get used to it outside. Clouds gathered over the mountains. The air turned cold, promising snow. Inside, the fire crackled, and for the first time, ClariS didn't feel like a burden. She felt useful, maybe even wanted. As dust settled, Griffith mended a harness while she mended a torn shirt she'd found among his things. The cloth was soft, worn thin with years of use. She wondered whose hands had once sewn it. Wife, sister, a mother long gone. When he saw it later, something passed over his face. Pain, memory, and then gratitude. Didn't know that needed fixing, he said quietly. It was small. Would have gotten worse, he nodded. Thank you. That night, snow began to fall, soft as feathers against the window. ClariS lay awake, listening to the wind and the slow crack of the fire. For the first time since being cast out of Cedar Falls, she didn't feel broken. She felt like maybe, just maybe, this exile could become a home. But she didn't yet know that before spring came, danger would rise from the valley, and the lonely man who gave her shelter would become the one who risked everything to save her soul. Snow blanketed the mountains that morning, turning the world into a silent ocean of white. ClariS woke to the smell of bacon and the sound of Griffith moving about the cabin. He was a man of few words, but every motion carried purpose, strength, and something she couldn't name. A quiet sadness, like a melody only the mountains remembered. You sleep all right? He asked when she stepped into the kitchen. Better than I have in years, she said honestly. Thank you. He nodded once storm's coming. Need to make sure the animals are ready. I'll help. He tried to protest, but she was already pulling on her boots. Together they worked side by side, patching the chicken coop, stacking wood, and checking the roof of the barn. The snow fell thicker by the hour, dusting her hair and coat. But for the first time in a long time, ClariS didn't mind the cold. Work kept her alive, her hands steady, her heart quiet. When they returned to the cabin, breathless and dusted in white, Griffith handed her a mug of steaming coffee. Their fingers brushed, and for one brief heartbeat, the silence between them felt electric. She looked up, met his gaze, and forgot the chill in the air. Thank you, she whispered. He cleared his throat. You're earning your keep just fine, Miss Vaughn. ClariS, she corrected softly. Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe even warmth, Clarice. Then that night, the storm raged outside, howling against the cabin walls. Griffith checked the fire, then paused at her door. If the cold gets bad, there's extra quilts in the trunk. Don't be shy about using them. Good night, Mr. Cade. He hesitated, then said, Griffith. When the door shut, ClariS smiled into the darkness. The days rolled into weeks. She found rhythm in the wilderness. Feeding chickens, baking bread, patching clothes. The chores filled her hours, but it was the quiet companionship that filled her soul. Griffith would read by the fire each evening, sometimes aloud scripture, poetry, even worn pages of old tales. His voice, deep and rough from years of wind and woods, warmed the cabin more than the fire ever could. Winter deepened. One night, thunder rumbled over the mountains, rare for a snowstorm. ClariS jumped at the sound, clutching her blanket. Moments later came a gentle knock. You all right in there? I'm fine, she called. Storm's bad. Just checking his voice at her door shouldn't have calmed her, but it did. She lay back down, listening to the steady rhythm of his footsteps retreating, and felt safer than she had in years. By morning, the world outside was buried in white. Griffith helped her into a thick wool coat before they stepped out to check the animals. It was far too large, but it smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. It was hers, wasn't it? ClariS asked quietly. He froze, his jaw tightening. Yes, my wife's. I'm sorry. He shook his head. Don't be. She's been gone a long time. The way he said it told her more than words ever could. Laws lived in him like an old scar, healed but never forgotten. They worked together, repairing the coop roof. Snowflakes clung to his dark hair. And when she laughed at something, a chicken flapping against her skirt, he looked at her like it was the first laugh he'd heard in 8 years. That night, while the storm built again, Griffith sat by the fire, oiling his rifle. Clary swed beside him. The silence was easy, filled with the warmth of shared space. After a while, she found the courage to ask, "Why did you agree to take me in?" He paused, turning the rifle slowly in his hands. "Judge Crenshaw's an old friend. I owed him. Thought maybe you'd need a place to catch your breath. You didn't have to be kind. My mother raised me better than turning people away from a warm fire." Clary smiled faintly. "Then I should thank her. Best woman I ever knew," he said softly. "Always said a person's worth ain't measured by what they've lost, but by what they keep on giving." The words sank deep into her heart. The next morning, the world was silver and still. Griffith saddled his mule, preparing to ride down the valley for supplies, when she caught his arm. "Be careful," she said without thinking. He nodded once. "Always am." When he rode away, the silence of the cabin felt sharper than usual. It was then she realized how much his presence filled the space, how much she'd come to rely on the quiet steadiness of him. By afternoon, snow began again, soft and relentless. She kept busy cleaning, mending, and baking. When the sun dipped behind the mountains, she heard the distant jingle of a mule's harness. Relief washed over her. Griffith returned. Only he wasn't alone. An old prospector rode beside him, a grizzled man with a beard white as frost. They stomped into the cabin, shaking off the cold ClariS Vaughn. "Meet Landry Croft." Griffith said, "He's half gossip, half miracle worker." Landry chuckled. "And all appetite, ma'am. Smells like you've been cooking." That night after supper, the prospector leaned forward, heard something ugly down in the valley. He said, "Rumor of a baby farm. Women kept against their will. Children sold to the highest bidder." ClariS froze. "That can't be true." Landry nodded grimly. "Seen enough to know evil when it's walking on two legs. Might be operating out of the old mining camp by Canyon Creek." Griffith's eyes darkened. "That's less than a day's ride." Claris's stomach twisted. She knew too well what it felt like to be judged by her body's worth. The thought of women being used like livestock made her tremble. "Someone has to stop it," she said, voice shaking. Griffith looked at her long and hard. "Yeah, you mean that I do? Then we'll find out the truth." Quote, and just like that, the cabin that had been her refuge became their mission. They planned carefully over the next days. Maps drawn, supplies packed, weapons checked. When the moonless night came, they rode through the snow, hearts pounding with purpose. Canyon Creek was darker than sin itself. The old mining camp half buried in drifts, but in one of the buildings a lantern burned. Voices echoed, men's voices cruel and careless. Through a crack in the wall they saw them. Women behind bars, thin and frightened, and the men counting money, discussing deliveries and buyers. Clarissa's hands clenched around Griffith's arm. Rage filled her chest like fire. They slipped away before being seen, hearts hammering, snow muffling every step. By dawn they were back at the cabin, cold and shaken, but alive. "We'll go to the marshal," Griffith said. "Get lawmen up here. End it." But before they could, the next storm brought more than snow. It brought danger to their very door. 3 riders appeared out of the blizzard, their faces hard, their purpose darker than the storm itself. Griffith reached for his rifle. "Stay inside," he ordered. ClariS didn't listen because sometimes the only way to stop evil is to stand beside the man willing to fight it. The wind howled through the trees as 3 riders closed in on the cabin, their horses snorting steam in the freezing air. Griffith stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, his body tense and still as a drawn bow. ClariS watched from the window, her pulse racing. She recognized the lead rider. Vernick Stiles, a man with a smile as sharp as a knife and a reputation darker than sin. Mr. Cade Stiles called out, voice slick as oil. "Mind if we come in? Got some business to discuss." "Say your piece from there," Griffith replied, calm but steady, eyes never leaving the man's gun hand. Stiles chuckled. "Word in the valley says, you and your lady friend have been poking around places you shouldn't. Now we can't have folks spreading lies about respectable business operations." Respectable Griffith's voice was ice. "You mean the baby farm? The one you're running up Canyon Creek Stiles?" Smile faltered. "Now that's a dangerous accusation, Cade. You might want to watch your mouth." Behind him, his men began to fan out, hands resting on their revolvers. Inside, Clarice's heart pounded so loud she could hear it echo off the cabin walls. She knew these men hadn't come to talk. They'd come to silence. She grabbed Griffith's spare pistol from above the mantel and stepped out onto the porch before fear could stop her. "I don't think we'll be keeping quiet," she said, steadying the gun in both hands. Stiles laughed. "Well, now look at that. The barren wife's got a backbone. How touching." "You can shoot me if you want," Clara said, voice shaking but clear. "But it won't change what you've done. The truth always gets out." For a moment, no one moved. Then a single gunshot cracked the air. But it didn't come from Griffith or Stiles. One of Stiles' men screamed, clutching his shoulder. From the treine, a deep voice rang out. "Us Marshal, drop your weapons." Landry Croft stepped from the woods, rifle in hand, his voice carrying across the snow. It was a bluff, but it worked. The second outlaw bolted, scrambling for his horse. Stiles spun toward Griffith, fury twisting his face. "You made a mistake, Mountain Man." Griffith didn't hesitate. The rifle roared once. Stiles dropped to his knees, shock etched on his face. "You'll burn for this," he rasped. "Maybe," Griffith said, "but not today." Quote, "When it was over, the snow was stained red, and the cabin was silent except for the wind." ClariS lowered her pistol, her hands trembling. Griffith turned to her, his face hard, but his voice gentle. "You all right?" She nodded, breath shaking. "I am now." It took 2 days for word to reach Denver. When the marshals arrived, they found everything just as Griffith and ClariS had said. The camp at Canyon Creek, the imprisoned women, the stolen babies. The operation was torn apart piece by piece, and justice for once came swift and sure. But victory had its price. Some of the rescued women were too weak to survive. Others carried scars that no doctor could mend. ClariS helped nurse them, holding hands, whispering comfort in the same soft voice she'd once used to pray for a child of her own. When the last wagon left, taking the survivors down to safety, Griffith stood beside her, his hand brushing hers. "You did good, ClariS," he said. "Better than good." She looked at him, tears in her eyes. "So did you." The weeks that followed passed in a blur of snow and quiet recovery. The cabin became a refuge again, not just for them, but for their hearts. The danger had bound them together, and now the silence between them felt like something sacred. Not emptiness, but peace. One night, after Landry returned with fresh supplies, he eyed them both over his mug of coffee. "You two keep dancing around each other, and you're liable to wear holes in the floorboards." ClariS blushed. "Mr. Croft, please." "Don't Mr. Croft me," he huffed. "I'm old enough to speak the truth. You love each other. Stop pretending otherwise." That evening, ClariS stood alone on the porch, snow falling soft as feathers. She wasn't sure when Griffith came out, but suddenly he was there, close enough to feel his warmth through the cold night. "Landry's got a big mouth," she murmured. "Yeah," Griffith said softly. "But he's right." Her breath caught. She turned toward him, heart hammering ClariS. He said, voice low and rough, "I've been alone a long time. Thought that was all I deserved. But since you came here, this place feels like home again." "You feel like home." Tears filled her eyes. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I can't give you children. I'm barren. Stop." He touched her face, gentle as falling snow. "You're not barren. You're brave, strong, kind. If we never have children, I'd still count myself blessed because I'd have you." She broke then, not from pain, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being seen, not as broken, but as whole. Griffith kissed her, and it was nothing like the cold duty she'd known before. It was warmth, fire, and the promise of belonging. They married the next morning, Landry grinning as he pronounced them husband and wife right there in the snow. Months passed. Spring melted the ice and wildflowers painted the meadow in gold and violet. Their love grew in quiet, everyday ways. Shared work, soft laughter, the comfort of arms that felt like safety. Then one night, the sound of crying woke them both. They opened the door to find a small basket on the porch. Inside lay a baby girl, no more than a few months old, wrapped in a faded quilt. A note pinned to her blanket read, "She's yours. Her name is Grace." ClariS lifted the child, tears streaming down her cheeks as the baby's tiny fingers curled around hers. Griffith looked at them both, wonder in his eyes. Looks like heavens found a way after all. The child who had been left in the snow became their daughter. They never learned who left her, only that she came from one of the rescued women, a final gift born of tragedy and love. Years later, neighbors would still tell the story of Griffith and ClariS Cade, the barren woman who found a child on her doorstep, and the lonely cowboy who taught her that sometimes family isn't something you're given. It's something you build from the ashes of what broke you. On quiet evenings when the mountains glowed gold in the sunset, ClariS would hold Grace close and whisper, "Let the world call us cursed. In this cabin we are blessed." And Griffith, sitting beside her, would smile the way only a man at peace can smile, knowing that every mile of hardship had led him right where he was meant to be. The wind carried their laughter across the pines, blending with the howl of distant coyotes and the soft rustle of the trees. A hymn of love, redemption, and the wild grace that finds its home in the unlikeliest of hearts.